Hey, welcome to Youth Doc. You've been in youth ministry for a number of years, and in that process of those years, you're now at the place that you have one of your own biological kids in your youth ministry. Today, I want to discuss a principle that we carried in our ministry with our kids that'll help you greatly. Today's principle is going to help you if you have a teenager that's in your youth ministry that actually is your kid, as well as when you have parent volunteers in your youth ministry, giving them this principle also to follow and live by will help them be successful in your youth ministry. I want to start off to say, if you're in youth ministry and you don't have a teenager of your own, that's really, really hard. I have a majors in church ministries with a concentration in youth. My wife has a master of arts in counseling. And I can tell you that having a teen in your house, even with all the training and all the years we've had in youth ministry, having an actual teen in your house is totally different than just being the youth pastor that has no teenager in your house. Some of you that are listening to this, you've experienced this and you're shaking your head yes right now that you totally agree and are thinking, thank goodness somebody's saying this to some of these other guys. But that's the reality, that the theory is totally different than that kid who's in your house. I was at Youth Specialties One Day Conference one year, and we were sitting around in this breakout group, and we had done our assignment, and so everybody's sitting there. And this young guy who's probably somewhere around 20 to 25 looks at us around the circle and he says, hey, can I ask y'all something while we got this time? Says, how do you do good parent ministry? And I just looked at him and I said, well, if you really want to know, the easiest way to do parent ministry is have a teen of your own. See, the second that you have a teenager of your own, you become one of them. One of them as in a parent of a teenager. And so now you have a relatability to parents like you never had before, because now you're in the trenches with them, typically with a brain dead kid who was pretty smart until puberty hit. By the way, as a side note, don't know that this is biologically sound, but I have this theory that what happens in adolescence is the body begins to grow so much that all the oxygen goes to grow muscle and bone so the kid can sprout up and no oxygen gets to the brain for several years. It's a theory. I don't know whether it's true or not. Some of you may want to make a comment about that. So the principle is this. If you want to be successful with a teen of your own in your youth ministry, where they want to be there in your youth ministry, here's the principle. It also works for parents who volunteer, and that's this. If you treat your teenager as a teenager, then your teenager won't mind being in your youth ministry. But the minute that you treat your teenager as your teenager, and you treat them different because, well, you're my teen and how could you behave like this, you have wiped out any credibility in the youth ministry in that your teenager's mind. They're like, I don't ever want to be here again because my dad's calling me out or my mom's calling me out for this. You treat them like you do every other teenager. So whatever discipline you would give, whatever rules you have in the youth ministry, those are the things that you hold on to and you're going to do within the structure of the youth ministry. And if you do that, you'll gain credibility then with your teenager. Two stories around this. I had a son and a daughter, and then two more daughters with a fairly decent sized gap in between, a 7-year gap in between. But as my son came into the youth ministry, things went well. As my daughter came into the youth ministry and we were heading to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for a trip, we'd had a rule that you had to have at least 2 teenagers, and most teenagers bulked around even more. When you're walking around town, at least 2 of the same gender had to be together at any one time. And we as adults better not catch you by yourself or just a guy-girl kind of coupling up. And so that was a rule that we had. As we were heading to Gatlinburg the first year that my daughter was going, my wife looked at me and said, don't you think we ought to make that a larger group? And I was like, no, because we've held on to this rule and asked parents to trust us with this rule all along. And I said, besides, most of the kids gather in bigger groups than that anyway, but they need to at least have, you know, 2 of the same sex plus 1 other person, or 3 or more people together. And I was like, so that's the way we've usually handled it. So we're not changing it just because now our daughter's walking around town. And so what is that? That's treating my teenager as a teenager, not treating her different than other teenagers. We usually would give our kids however much money that we ask parents to send with their kids. So when they went on a trip, we didn't keep their money in our pocket. We handed them a whole hunk of money and said, here's your money, and pretty much left them alone for that trip on how they spent it, and how they managed their money and such, treating them like another teenager. That didn't stop our teenagers from, like in concerts and stuff, coming up to us and all of a sudden wanting to be our child again and saying, hey mom, hey dad, would you buy me a t-shirt? Would you buy me a CD? You know, can we sponsor a Compassion Child? You know, it wasn't like they didn't come up and ask us because they then wanted to be our child. But we can't make them our child in the middle of this. We have to make them a teenager. This works for the volunteers also. So encouraging your volunteers to follow this rule. That is not your child, that is a child in the youth ministry. Or that is not your teen, that is a teen in the youth ministry. And so use that as a principle with your adult volunteers. We went on a mission trip one year, and we had a parent with us. Her teenager was there too on the trip. And her teenager had braces. And of course, you got to take care of the braces. And so the mom walked into the room where a whole group of teenagers were sitting around and looked at her daughter and said, have you brushed your teeth this morning? My wife immediately, based on this principle, walked up to the lady who was volunteering and said, have you asked all the rest of the students if they've brushed their teeth? So this mom then proceeded to go around the room to all the rest of the teenagers and ask them if they'd brushed their teeth too. Once again, the principle is treat your teenager like a teenager, and they won't mind you being on the trip. But the minute that you treat them like your teenager, they never want you back. And so I really push this with my parents and encourage my parents to be involved in our student ministry, but to hold on to that principle. So I hope this little principle will help you develop better parent ministry and be a better student leader as you have teenagers of your very own, your own biological kids in your youth ministry, that will help them to want to be there and want to go through your youth ministry and be glad that you're the youth pastor of the church where they attend and where they have youth group. If you want to make a comment, you got a principle you want to share, drop those down in the comments. I'd love to see those. I'd love to interact with those. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd love for you to subscribe. Once again, I'm a 30-year veteran youth minister, just throwing out some advice on about every week to every other week basis. God bless and take care.